Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a beer, it's time for some Path of Exile discussion. I've been doing a series where I've been looking at popular, powerful endgame unique items, and one that came up when I put out a request to viewers to suggest videos for this series was Malachai's Artifice. And immediately I was like hitting myself going, why didn't I think of that? That was really stupid of me. So, Malachai's Artifice does two fundamental things. The first one is it transforms your resistances. This can be really powerful early in the game. So if you happen to get Malachai's Artifice, like in, say, if you get it in Act 1, then when you come up to Vaal, you can take advantage of the tremendous amount of cold resistance that this can give you, and that can make Vaal a breeze. Then when you go into Act 2, and you come up to the Chamber of Sins, you can go, oh, lots of lightning damage. All right, I'm just going to change around what resist Malachai's Artifice provides me, just by socketing a different gem in it, and I'm going to breeze through that area as well. But fundamentally, I wanted to focus on its endgame applications here. So whilst this is a really powerful twink item for going through Acts 1 and 2, you can also do that with Goldrum. And really, people that have got one character at endgame are able to trade for a Goldrum pretty easily too. So, Malachai's Artifice at endgame is all about that line, socketed gems have elemental equilibrium. So this is an unset ring, which means that it has one socket in it, and that socket is always white, which means that you can stick any type of gem in it. Don't stick a white gem in it like a portal, because it will end up making you feel really stupid. You'll just end up with a ring that is giving you minus 20% to all elemental resistances. However, what elemental equilibrium does is important to go over here. So this will be a recap for some of you, but for those of you that haven't seen this keystone before, this is one of those real build transformers that's available on the passive tree. Elemental Equilibrium is designed to reward you for rotating between 3 different types of elemental damage. And because it's asking a lot of you, it has a tremendous reward. It's reasonably close to the center of the passive tree, reasonably near the Scion starting area, but a little bit north of it. And what it does is it causes enemies you hit with elemental damage to temporarily get 25% resistance to the element you hit them with, and 50% resistance penalty to all other elements. Now, one thing that's important here is if you're hitting with multiple elements, then the enemy gets a buff to its resistances against those 2 or 3 elements, and only gets nerfed to 0 or 1 element. So this means that if your character is primarily focused on dealing fire damage, you want to make sure that you are frequently hitting monsters with a skill that is dealing 0 fire damage, but that is dealing at least 1 point of cold or lightning damage. And the best way to do this is usually in conjunction with the skill Stormbrand, but it is not just Stormbrand, there are other alternatives as well. You need to then be very careful that your Stormbrand does not accidentally deal a little bit of fire damage, because even if your Stormbrand is hitting for 10,000 lightning damage and 3 points of fire damage, that is enough to ensure that Elemental Equilibrium will bolster the monster against fire damage as well as lightning, rather than weakening its resistances there, as you would desire. Additionally, you need to be actually hitting the monsters. So you need to not use something like a Searing Bond, which deals fire damage over time. You need to actually be inflicting hits. However, if you can jump through all of these hoops, then Malachai's Artifice is probably the single item on your character that will provide the biggest increase to damage. Against a monster that has 40% native cold resistance, if you're dealing primarily cold resistance, then going from 40% resistance to negative 10% resistance through the use of Elemental Equilibrium and Malachai's Artifice will be a massive 83% more multiplier to your damage. For comparison, this is considerably more than you would get from one additional support gem in almost all circumstances. So it's absolutely massive. So, where do you get Malachai's Artifice? This is a drop anywhere unique, and it's actually not all that rare. It is in the same rarity tier as Surge Binders, Tabula Rasa, and a bunch of other items that you probably don't pick up. So I'm mentioning one that you do pick up and one that you don't pick up there, but it's a tier 4 rarity unique, or at least it's believed to be based upon information that was discovered during the Ultimatum League. This is a league out of date now, so who knows, maybe something's changed, but I still believe that to be mostly likely true. And what that means in practice is that by the time you hit level 90, you probably on average have 2 of these, just in terms of what's dropped for you, and by the time you hit level 95, you've probably had 12 or more of them drop. It is really, really, really common once you get solidly into endgame, and you'll have an absolute fountain of these tier 4 unique drops. So, the other things that need to be said about Elemental Equilibrium from Malachai's Artifice. This does transfer onto your minions, and this can be really, really, really powerful. So, if you have a minion that gains Elemental Equilibrium, and it's dealing, say, purely fire damage, then you will be able to take advantage of Malachai's Artifice. And this is commonly, well, maybe not commonly, but it's at least occasionally used in conjunction with the Ice Golem, because the Ice Golem doesn't hit very hard, but it does hit a lot of the screen. So a couple of pitfalls you need to watch out for with Elemental Equilibrium. Firstly, make certain that you are not using any Abyss Jewels that add flat damage of the type that you are trying to debuff the enemy against. So let's say, for instance, that you are trying to use Malachai's Artifice in conjunction with Stormbrand in order to debuff an enemy's resistances to cold. And this is a common setup. So let's say that you're playing an Ice Shot build, and so all the damage from your Ice Shot is cold damage. What you want to make sure is that whatever skill you've got in Malachai's Artifice is not benefiting from any Abyss Jewels that add cold damage to them. And additionally, so that means your Stormbrand. Additionally, you want to make sure that you're not using any equipment that just happens to have added cold damage to spells on it. It can be quite difficult to get rid of those mods if they happen to be on an item. Like, let's say that you're looking for a helmet for your build, and you find something that's absolutely amazing. It's got the nearby enemies have minus 12% to cold resistance, elevated mod, but it unfortunately has some sort of cold damage to spells mod on it. That is going to be just something you can't really use. So you've got to keep that in mind with it, but the benefits outweigh the impact that it has on your gearing. The next thing that we need to talk about with Malachai's Artifice is the effect it has on your character's resistances. So this gives you a massive boost to one element in resistances. So let's say that you're using Stormbrand, which is a blue gem. You are going to get up to 100% added to your lightning resistance, but you're going to get a minus 20% to all elements. So that means a net minus 20% cold resist, minus 20% fire, plus 80% lightning. Or if you choose to catalyze the ring, you're looking at minus 24, plus 96. And I do think you should catalyze it. So that is a tremendous amount of change to your elemental resistances. This often means that equipping Malachai's Artifice is quite a commitment that changes your character a fair bit. You will need to change around some of the rare items that you're using. Fortunately, this got made a lot easier with the addition of Harvest, and this still remains in the current version of Harvest that's in the game. There is a fairly common craft that lets you change one resistance into another on a rare item. So for instance, if you were originally using an amulet that happened to have a large amount of lightning resistance, and that amulet is a rare item, it can't be a unique, and then you eventually decide, I'm going to equip Malachai's Artifice with Stormbrand in it, you can then change the lightning resistance that is on your amulet and change it to one of the other resistances that you need. So let's say that that the penalty to resistances on Malachai's Artifice crangles your fire resist. You can then change that to fire resist, and hopefully that's enough. You just need to keep that in mind. That means that this is not an item that you can comfortably swap in for bossing on your character. If you're going to wear Malachai's Artifice, you are pretty much committing to wearing it full time. Lastly, it would be remiss of me to talk about Malachai's Artifice and not talk about the very similar Replica. Replica Malachai's Artifice is extremely, extremely niche. This is only being used by 4 high-level characters in the Expedition League. However, I do think it's quite good. So, socketed gems they have Secrets of Suffering, and this isn't explained well in the game, but what it means is that they lose the ability to freeze and chill and gain the ability to inflict brittle. That's the powerful use. They also lose the ability to ignite, and they gain the ability to inflict scorch, and they lose the ability to shock, and they gain the ability to sap. These alternate ailments. Brittle, at the time that I'm recording this video, which is in 3.15 expansion, is extremely powerful. It adds base critical strike. It adds base critical strike to hits against the enemy that you're hitting, and the numbers are staggeringly high on it. Essentially, if you can inflict a significant brittle on an enemy, then you can probably get them into a situation where you always crit them, as long as you've got enough accuracy to hit them. You'll be critical strike capped again for hits against that enemy. The builds that do use Replica Artifice almost universally use it in conjunction with Phantasmal Barrage. So they'll have a lot of flat cold damage on their gear, and then they will use Phantasmal Barrage. Phantasmal Barrage has the effect that when it inflicts ailments on enemies, and you will be using this with a 23 quality Phantasmal Barrage, so we'll talk 23 quality, for calculating how intense that ailment is, it treats your damage with Barrage as 215% of what you actually deal. And so this is the most popular use of Replica Malachai's Artifice at the moment. It is a different item, but I do feel it needs to be mentioned. And Replica Malachai's Artifice is a common drop in Replica unique item Grand Heist. Anyways, that's all I've got on Malachai's Artifice. I will just add one last thing. I always finish my videos now with may your Vaal orbs have interesting results. Let me just say that don't use them on Malachai's Artifice. What happens when you Vaal a Malachai's Artifice is that if you succeed in adding a Vaal implicit to the item, it will be at the expense of its existing implicit. What that means is that your Vaal orb removes the socket that makes the item work. And so even if you get the best possible outcome from a corruption on a ring, which is adding the uber rare corruption, bleeding cannot be inflicted on you, you still end up with a terrible ring that is worse than a scoured ring. And that's because it'll have this amazing anti-bleed implicit, but it will have -20 to all elemental resistances. It will have no socket, and therefore will basically do nothing of much good at all. So the only way you can get around that is if you there are a couple of convoluted ways that you can create a Malachai's Artifice that has two implicits. So it will have has one socket, and it will also have the Gilded Fossil implicit of this item sells for more to vendors. And then if you Vaal that, there is a chance that the Gilded Fossil implicit will be taken away instead. So there is a chance of that happening and getting an amazing Vaal orb result from a Malachai's Artifice. But broadly speaking, unless you know exactly what you're doing, don't ever Vaal this one. So that's all I've got for this. It'll be interesting to see how well Secrets of Suffering and specifically Brittle survives the 3.16 patch notes. I'm kind of expecting a nerf there, but we'll see what happens. And chances are Replica Malachai's Artifice will be hit pretty hard if there is a nerf to Brittle. But Brittle is so good in other situations that I wouldn't be surprised to see it get nerfed. 3.16 spoiler season will be underway soon. There'll be little tidbits of information over the next little while. So keep following the channel, and if you want, you can subscribe to it, and you'll see all of my discussion of the patch notes. But otherwise, I'm going to call it an end here. May your Vaal orbs have interesting results.